So welcome everybody to our September cafe event, The Evolution of Regenerative Design. We're back from a 2-month summer break. We hope you've all enjoyed the summer. Hopefully had some relaxing times and maybe also some success in your work life. You can share something about that with us today, perhaps. And also we hope that depending on where in the world you are, you're safe from any flood event that's happening right now or any wildfires. Unfortunately, it seems like that is becoming a more regular thing that we have to mention at the start of our meetings now. Well, it's great to be back. It's great to see all of you, a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. And we're especially excited today to have Daniel Christian Wahl with us, or as the German in me wants to say, Daniel Christian Wahl. Don't know what he prefers. He will be not doing a presentation today, like you've maybe seen in a lot of our other meetings, but we will have an open dialogue with our very own Peter Jones, and then, of course, the opportunity for you to engage in the conversation as well, ask questions, and provide comments. Before we get into that, as you might know, if you've been with us before, we would like to do a land acknowledgement. We're all in many different places across the globe, but because I'm sitting in Toronto at the moment, I will be doing the land acknowledgement for Toronto, and please feel free to be mindful, think about the land that you're on, depending on which place you're in. So for Toronto, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And as always, we want to encourage you to not just acknowledge the land that you're on as you're in online meetings and at the start as we did now, but also throughout your everyday life. So continuing on with the agenda for today, which we will flip around a little bit, as I've just mentioned at the start of the meeting. We'll begin with the welcome that we're in the middle of, do a little icebreaker. We will then share some FEI updates with you. Our Executive Director, Andy Zad, will be doing that. And then we will start a dialogue. That dialogue might immediately be with Daniel Christian Wahl on the evolution of regenerative design, or we might start with a dialogue with Peter Jones. We'll see about that as we get to the end of our updates, so bear with us. We're doing this on the fly today. As always, just a quick slide, a quick introduction to the FEI for those that perhaps have not been with us before. Let's talk about Flourishing at the beginning. Why is it the Flourishing Enterprise Institute? What does that perhaps have to do with regenerative cultures, if that's what you're interested in? Well, Flourishing is a scientifically grounded vision focused on realizing the full potential of individuals, communities, and ecosystems, as it says here. So it's a way of looking at sustainability that goes beyond traditional sustainability, which focuses on essentially maintaining or being able to maintain the status quo. And rather than that, Flourishing aims at achieving the highest potential of well-being for individuals, for societies, and for all living beings on the planet for generations to come. So the Flourishing Enterprise Institute is a research and innovation network, and we're trying to steward essentially a new generation of enterprises that are capable of supporting this vision of flourishing, that are capable of enhancing the well-being of their communities and wider ecosystems. We're founded in 2019. We're housed at Veris at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo and at OCAD University in Toronto. And currently we're operating on funding that's granted to us by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in Canada, as well as the Bossely School of International Affairs. At this moment, let me just take a second to ask you to please, for the first time, engage in our chat and just briefly let us know your location and let us know your affiliation, just so your fellow participants here can see who's in the room and who they're sharing this meeting with. That'd be great. Thank you. And as you do that, We will start with our short icebreaker for today. Today, you don't see a lot of animal faces on the screen. For those of you who have been here before, that's maybe what you expected. We're doing it a little bit differently today. We want to know how you are. We'd like you to share with us if there's one word that best describes you today. So that word can be whatever you like, but we wanted to encourage you that this word doesn't have to be in English, but if you have a different first language or you live in a different country now that perhaps has a different first language than English, feel free to share foreign words with us. It's always nice to see how diverse the group is, where we are across the globe, and to hear some new words that we maybe haven't heard before. So feel free to share out loud. Just unmute yourself. We'd like you guys to be active. So just feel free to share the word out loud, but you can also absolutely put the word in the chat if that's what you prefer. So I'll be quiet for the moment and I'd love to hear from you. What's a word that best describes you today?
Ever curious.
That's great, Donna. Something tells me it's not just the word for today.
No.
Áthas, which is the Irish for happiness.
That's great. Firstly, glad to hear that you're happy. Could you repeat the word? I didn't quite hear it.
Áthas. Actually,
Áthas.
the phrase is áthas on down, and in Irish it would mean the happiness of the world is on me.
Wonderful. I love that. I hope that's representative of our group today as well. Thanks so much for sharing.
I think the word that I'm looking for is rhizomatic or mycelial. As designers, we grow connections between all the people that we interact with, right?
Wonderful. Rhizomatic. That's a new one. I love it. Yeah. So I hope we're a happy, curious, and rhizomatic group today. Carrie shared in the chat clear-eyed. Morgan just said curious. Love those as well. Perhaps one more person that would like to share? Grounded, I see. Yeah, said in the chat. And Maya is curious. Maya, could you let us hear that word? If you feel comfortable, you don't have to. I have not heard that word before.
It's nyfiken. I have a lot of children at the background, so I will use the chat and not speak so much.
That's amazing, amazing. Yeah, thanks so much for still unmuting and letting us hear. Well, that's great, everyone. Thanks so much already for being so engaged and sharing with us. We totally encourage you to do that throughout the session. We will now end the slides. And oh no, actually, I will be moving forward in the slides. We will move directly on to Randy. But thanks so much. If you have any questions also throughout Randy's updates, feel free to speak up either in the chat or to unmute yourself at points. We will be monitoring the chat and we'll try to address your questions as quickly as possible. So without further ado, I will just skip over a couple of slides and Randy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Tim, and welcome everybody. It makes me a little sad to have to defer from the main event and move on to the FEI updates. Of course, you guys are here for the conversation, the dialogue that Peter and Daniel are about to engage in, and hopefully we have Daniel soon. But for now, appreciate your flexibility in bearing with us. We'll move on to some FEI updates. Whether you've been following closely over the past year and years or are new to us, perhaps reconnecting after some time, the detail here may be more or less resonant in terms of what context you may have to appreciate it. So consider this just a high-level update. And of course, if you have questions or would like to learn a little bit more, feel free to engage with us directly after the session or in the chat. So I want to just stretch back to the FEI's focus as an organization. As you can see here, simply, as we've stated it publicly, our goal is ultimately to help steward a transition towards high-performing enterprises that are capable of enhancing well-being of the communities and wider ecosystems that they're part of. Ultimately, we want flourishing organizations that contribute to a flourishing world. And I think if I'm to say on behalf of our team, the goal is very practically oriented. As much as we are an applied research institute and community practice, our goal is to see the work that we do and the community that we engage result and contribute to enable a future that allows for organizations to transition in this direction. Tim? To update you a little, the organization is evolving as we learn. We had a pause for a little while and relaunched or updated our approach to delivering and working with our community practice last October. And what we've seen over the past 12 months is that the strongest engagement that we've developed has been through establishing practical projects, the things that we're doing on the ground. And it is these applied research projects that are also making the biggest real-world impact. We've also experienced that these projects are leading to the development of deeply collaborative relationships with individuals like you, and new possibilities for action. And so in reflecting on kind of the whole space that we're in, there are many organizations focused on thought leadership, on building communities that engage and so forth. And I think what we came to terms with was the real substance of our work is less founded in just having a network and being talking heads on LinkedIn or what have you, and more about the practical applied research that we're doing in the field with practitioners, with experts in bringing innovation to organizations that is making the biggest difference. And that is perhaps the unique contribution and the greatest contribution the FEI has to make. So we're evolving our focus and efforts, including how we engage this community, to center around our projects. And of course, these projects will evolve over time, but we have a set that we're starting with. So there are 5 project-based work streams that we'd like to introduce to you. And it will be in the coming weeks and months, especially in October when we have a session dedicated to this future that we'll be speaking to the community about, that will talk more about these project-based work streams. So they include systemic management innovations, the Enterprise Evolution Program, our Municipalities Adapting in Response to Complexity Partnership, our context-based sustainability method and community of practice, and a pilot program we built around the low carbon resilience approach. So I'm going to very briefly touch on each of these just to give you some idea of what we've been up to. If you're interested in learning about them individually, we're going to circulate some related information in line with each of these. You may have seen articles through our newsletters and posts related to these various work streams, but count on us to make it really clear sort of what composes them and how you can get involved or learn more as we continue on from this session. All right, so starting with systemic management innovations, this is an emerging field of innovation that we've really taken it upon ourselves as a collective to explicitly define. So we've been in the process of looking through the literature, defining our own paper that essentially casts or attempts to introduce and define the field of systemic management innovations to the world. And at a very basic level and as a starting point, we see systemic management innovations as those that apply systems theory to recast how strategic management is understood and also provide meaningful guidance as to how they can be used to effectively adapt management practices on the ground. They're designed to respect science and ethics-based thresholds and contribute to organizations developing more integrative, collective, and adaptive practices. Moving on, we'll take a look at the Enterprise Evolution Program. So the program itself has been developed over the past 6 years and has been basically passed on to the FEI to steward on behalf of a growing collective of experts and organizations that will lead it forward. So Enterprise Evolution is a capability development program. It's facilitative and dialogic in nature that is designed to enable organizations to transition from conventional towards systemic strategic management practices. There's lots to unpack in relationship to this, and we've communicated a bunch about some of the practical work we've done in the field of 2 different cities in particular, that being City of Kitchener and City of Nanaimo. You may have followed some of those results. In any case, we've launched a development project to take Enterprise Evolution into its next generation form. So there's now more than 30 experts, practitioners, consultants, and organizations collaborating on this new design. And the essentially preparation of enterprise evolution for a more mainstream and widespread presence in the marketplace. Next, I'll quickly mention our partnership called Municipalities Adapting in Response to Complexity. For a whole host of reasons, we believe municipalities are a critical leverage point in creating the change we need to see globally. And so we focused on municipalities as a particularly important type of enterprise. So we've collaborated with the ICLE World Secretariat, with Refocus and Veris at Wilfrid Laurier University to develop what is an ambitious international learning and innovation partnership. It currently has about 150 organizations that are participating from across sectors, and the goal is really to enable municipalities to better respond to the complex systemic issues that are challenging them, and by helping them to transition towards systemic management practices. So what you'll notice is these three work streams are deeply interconnected and overlap in certain ways. So inside of this partnership, we are testing the Enterprise Evolution Program, and we're also experimenting with systemic management innovations as part of enabling this change in municipalities that we'd like to see. And so the FEI's role is very much centered around conducting applied research and learning from experiences as part of the practical field work the partnership is doing with municipalities on the ground. Next, I'll mention context-based sustainability, which is a methodology grounded in essentially an integrated and equity-informed management accounting practice. It's designed to authentically measure an entity's performance against science and ethics-based thresholds. It represents the world's first integrated multi-capital context-based measurement and reporting method. And it really is designed to transform how we measure and manage triple bottom line performance and accelerate progress towards the sustainable futures that we hope to create. So around this method, we have co-developed a community of inquiry and practice with R3.0 and the University of Guelph. There's about 30 or 40 individuals who are involved thus far, studying some of the work that we've already done in the field, looking to learn collaboratively and to bring this really profoundly powerful methodology forward as a means for making sense of science and ethics-based thresholds that you see in frameworks like the donut economics model and the SDGs down to an enterprise level scale. We have experienced that there's immense complexity involved in that process, and this group is really interested in helping to unpack that and enable others to leverage context-based sustainability to overcome the complexity involved. And finally, last but not least, I'll mention the low carbon resilience approach. So we have collaborated with the creator of low carbon resilience, which is the Action on Climate team at Simon Fraser University, to develop and launch a pilot program to take low carbon resilience as an approach into its next phase of development. So this approach was tested with 10 municipalities between 2018 and 2021 and produced profound results. Much like enterprise evolution, it's really about applying a systems lens to rethink how we approach the challenge of climate change. And so as part of that, you can see here on the right, the process is designed to take an integrated view of reducing risks and vulnerabilities, reducing emissions, and advancing co-benefits as a way of really addressing the systemic nature of climate change and what it is to effectively respond to it and the complexity related. So we will be essentially working with ACT and a group of about 40 or 50 organizations now to continue to evolve the low carbon resilience approach, integrating some of our knowledge, creating more opportunities for testing it in the field, and conducting applied research to learn from that process and publish results. On that note, so you now have the 5 project-based work streams that we are coming forward with. We will be, again, sharing more information and providing some references after this session in case you're interested in learning a little bit more about any of them. And this brings me to a next exciting update that relates to this, which is our next cafe. So in October, we have collaborated with Relating Systems Thinking and Design, that's RSD 13, an incredible multidisciplinary global conference this year titled Rivers of Conversations, to create a mini FEI symposium. So we had 4 or 5 sessions that members of our community had prepared to present on. And so we're going to combine those together in a symposium format to talk about the FEI. It begins with what should be an exceptional conversation between John Ehrenfeld and Peter Jones on the concept of flourishing enterprises. and will lead us into several conversations where we look at this future path the FEI is on and begin to talk about some of the projects and results that we've been creating in 3 of our 5 project-based work streams. The details on how you can register and so forth will be shared after the session. And of course, there is an opportunity to participate in the FEI symposium alone in case you don't want to participate in the entire conference. But I would strongly encourage you, if you are interested in this field of systemic design and flourishing in particular, and exploring the entire program. It is exceptionally well curated and made up of so many interdisciplinary thought leaders under one canvas or one umbrella. I imagine, just given the nature of what's been put together, there's bound to be more than a few sessions that I think you'll be excited to see. And finally, if you want to stay engaged with us, this is a little preemptive given that we don't yet have our conversation with Daniel having. Normally we'd share something like this at the end of our session, just to remind you all that you are welcome to connect with us at any time. If you want to share an opportunity for collaboration, if you have a question or want to share some feedback, of course, feel free to suggest innovations or research projects that we should be aware of, that you're involved in or have heard about, and that may contribute to our purpose and the direction we're headed. And of course, we're always looking for new team members. So whether it's to support our projects or research, mobilizing knowledge and innovations, or building our network, there's plenty of possibilities for getting more involved if you see yourself contributing to the purpose and focus that we hold. I think that's everything. Yes, and of course, the final thank you. That should be a final thank you. I'll pass it back to Tim on that note. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Randy. Let me just stop the share for the moment. Wonderful. Thanks for those updates. Peter, as far as I understand, we haven't heard from Daniel yet. Is that correct?
Not by email. I think he would likely just join the session. We had a confirmation from him with a large time difference, so it was very early this morning. I replied to that because I saw he had actually confirmed in that email. It looked like it might, when we calculate, it looked like he was saying it would be an hour. He was off by an hour, even though, So we haven't heard from by email, but I think he will show up. I appreciate people's patience, and I think, if you're willing to stay for the whole time of, the planned cafe time, he would be joining, and we can make the most use of our time now, and that at least half an hour with Daniel, and can beg him to stay a little later if others would like to as well. So I think we can play with this session right now and have our own dialogue. We have a really great group of people and a good context to start with.
I love that idea, Peter, and I'm thinking, people came here to hear about regenerative design, regenerative cultures, perhaps also flourishing, how those relate. So perhaps a way for you to actually engage the audience a little bit more and perhaps start a discussion around these topics that in a way then even prepares for the arrival of Daniel, and maybe will be a much more ready audience once he actually arrives here. So if you're okay with that, Peter, I would just hand you the reins. And
I am. No, let's go forward with this and prepare ourselves also for the conversation, so that we actually have an ongoing dialogue that then Daniel can embrace when he comes in, and so it may be almost a reversal from the original plan, which was to open up the dialogue with Daniel to everybody. But we have an amazing group of people that have decided to join us today. And so we really respect your time, joining in the middle of the day for most of you, or from Europe. This is valuable time, and want to, and I think that we can hold our own dialogue and discussion in a context that I'll draw from the experience that one of the members of today's session, if I can, I'll just name my colleague Greg Udelman, who with me over about a decade period, we co-hosted Design with Dialogue at OCAD University. where we would normally have well-planned circle dialogues with breakouts, all live sessions. We did some hybrid sessions as well during the COVID period, but for the most part, these were all live dialogues. And there were times that we would just use a process like this with a number of, with a simple process, with the approach to a circle, even online. So I'd like to keep everybody together and into the same kind of mindset around questions that I think could be of real interest and value to the group. I may not notice if Daniel joins the group. So Tim, if you see him in the waiting room and bring him in, just break in. But what I'd like to do is open it up with a couple of contextual questions for everybody. And I'd also invite you, if you're willing to switch your cameras on, especially if you're interested in participating, so that we see you as being in part of the group right now, so that we can be in participation together. And then if people are not in gallery view in Zoom, I'd recommend looking at the gallery, seeing who's here, seeing what a powerful group this is. So we have kind of an opportunity to learn from each other right now. The question of the evolution of regenerative design in particular, unless we have other regenerative design people in the group, and we might, I would like to open that. I'd like to actually open that up to the other design and sustainability as flourishing approaches that we are working with. And the questions I'd like to start with, and just to open it up with us and to see who'd like to start, and then we can take kind of a circle from there, either having you just introduce yourself and respond to the question, or feel free to raise a hand. But if we have a good give and take here, this can be a very natural process. And so I'd like to actually ask. I'm really interested in the types of design and let's say sustainability broadly, flourishing, regeneration, beyond sustainability, circular economy. We can see that in these different communities of practice, these different movements of engagement and influence, of change, have different theories of change and where change occurs and how change occurs and who has to change to have change occur, and what the vision for the outcome of that change will result in. That is, what is the future vision that we are changing to, not just change from the problems of today, but what is the vision for some of the different movements that we are working with. And so that's my pivot context. I wanted to open that up and with the question of, first of all, what are some of the different movements that we are part of, so that we can start to see what we're connecting with in terms of the other contributions and in fields that in fields of other committed participants, other stakeholder groups, other change groups that we're working with that might now even have some different names that you feel are allied and perhaps converging with regeneration and with flourishing. So I'd like to start with that, and it's almost like a check-in question, like, who are you? What, who else are you with, being here today? And so would anyone like to jump in with a suggestion with their group or the movement, let's say, and then I'd like to switch from there to discussing a bit of our theories of change and relating.
Hey, Peter, I'll just volunteer and maybe.
Sebastian, yes.
How you doing? It's been a while.
Good.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sebastian. I'm an industrial designer. Then I did my master's at OCAD. I'm currently working as a service designer in the public sector. I'm also the founder of a non-for-profit organization that helps street dogs and cats in Mexico City. And we've designed a process for kind of like running mobile spaying and neutering campaigns in rural communities. I'm trying to bring those people the vet to them, right? Some of these families have like 10, 15 animals. Yeah, that's a bit about me.
Well, thanks for that introduction. I don't know, Sebastian, if you knew that I'm now living in Mexico City, and so we
Really?
should follow up. Yes, I'm
Wow.
in.
That's wild. I haven't been there in 5 years.
I'm in Coyoacan in del Barrio del Niño Jesus.
Yeah. I know exactly where you are. That's great.
Yeah.
Have you been to the market?
Oh yeah. So in terms of theories of change, I mean, there's a lot happening here in Mexico City, but I can't keep up with it all. So it'd be good to have contacts from there. So that's an interesting group that you're part of. Now, can you say anything more about like any other organizations perhaps that you're working with that are part of the sustainability, different sustainability approaches? Is there?
I feel like as a designer, I've been pretty disappointed with the work, right? Like usually been tasked to design a bunch of garbage, bad ideas or dangerous things. And I'm kind of tired of it. It's usually, oh yeah, we're gonna be, pretend to be human-centered, pretend to be sustainable, pretend to be that, and at the bottom line, it's always money, 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 right? So until designers stop working in the service of capital, we are not building the futures that we want.
Well, Sebastian, that's really something coming from you. People don't realize that he was among the other functions of your design. You were very well known as a high-end boat designer, right?
Yeah. I kind of forget about that world. I kind of abandoned it.
Well,
I think I was drawn to it because of the complexity of designing an entire boat, but I think the complexity of designing maybe services or even futures has now caught my attention. It's a far more useful application of design to point it at these things than to point it at yachts.
Well, there could be a future of boats too, but I just wanted to say, just to show that that's a type of movement too in your own theory of change. Donna.
It is true. I can share a link to some work that I did about 10 years ago, maybe a bit more, and never really got off the ground, never really got, $60 million to build a sustainable boat.
Please do share. And there's some others would like to share. So Donna, you're hearing this up. And Sebastian, yeah, if you share that link in the chat, it would be interesting to follow up. Thank you.
Thanks. Building on your question, Peter, and it's really more to kind of warm us up around this. I think we're acknowledging that we're at a very critical juncture in kind of our own lives and our civilization history, and it's not easy going. And so there's, many people that have embarked on a regenerative journey. I'm not going to say much about institution, which is around helping to support and nurture all kinds of collaborative commons efforts from the space between. But the point I wanted to make here is there's many people that are still doing work that they no longer value, or people struggling to get work. And we're going to see more of this. And recognizing, I really appreciate your question around us doing more to integrate various aspects of what regenerative and regeneration really means. Because when Daniel does join us, that's one of the things I know we appreciate that he brings in is the recognition of how deep-rooted regenerative is, way beyond the typical disciplinary specialties that our industrialized Western world has got us all programmed to think in terms of sustainability and business and measurement and impact. But Daniel himself is speaking much more to the human side, the spiritual side, the becoming closer to place and land, and becoming more connected to our own indigeneity, which many of us, especially those that have lived in cities, have lost touch with. And to find ways to invite people into this journey, wherever they're starting from, and to make it welcoming and, to be able to be more vulnerable together around stuff. So that's much of the work that I think many of us are trying to do. And also, I'm the and lady, so I also tell people to stop me at any time. I just want to make space for others. But the thing I just want to add in there is, recognition that we've got all these gifts differing. And if we can find ways to support and lift us all around the ways that we can do this work, it's so terribly important, because we're still living in a very noisy and competitive world, where people are trying to promote their thing, their it. And this so much goes beyond the itifying and objectifying. And that's the essence of so much of what this work. So I'm going to stop there, but it's kind of get the heart started around this kind of conversation, which I think the reason everybody's here is because we really want to find ways, a variety of ways to advance this work and to support it across multiple disciplines and pathways. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Donna. I'll just add maybe one of the problems in the past with the idea of movements is just what you were suggesting, is that people get caught up into their own activities. And if we can look at different movements towards, beyond sustainable development, of flourishing, regenerative design, of the next stages of circularity, that these aren't movements that require people to subscribe to or to have an ideology to participate in and therefore to follow, but they're movements in preferential directions that go well beyond the kind of constraints of business as usual, and sustainability getting folded into business as usual. But they also aren't really activist there are activists, but activism tends to have a kind of followings. And we're looking at the reason I wanted to talk about movements in this way, and to ask about what other kind of groups or types of movements you might be part of that could converge, is that now we're really seeing that these are aligned, like regeneration and flourishing use a lot of the same language. And this is one of the questions I had for Daniel. Those that are involved in systems, or Lynn, yeah, your hand is up. I was going to say there are a number of systems people here too, systems thinkers, including John Ehrenfeld, and David Ng has joined us as well. But I wanted to, also hear from the systems movement, which has been, which Russell Akoff thought of as a movement. But first, Lynn, and then whoever is next.
Well, I'm glad you finished your thought there. Thanks, Peter. I wanted to put in the chat, because we're talking about movements, a really interesting map from Second Renaissance. And if you open it up, it's kind of all of these related sort of next civilization, next economy, next culture thinking. And I often think that, we are all on these different islands, and, how do we get the connectivity? Because we know that wide bands of connection make change happen faster. So, but this particular, just triggered by what other speakers have been talking about just now, is that there are other movements and that we are all connected in some way trying to make change. But it's a really interesting map. It's Second Renaissance, and it's produced by, or it's a project from Life Itself, I think it's called. So I'll leave that with you. It's interesting.
Thank you. No, I had seen that and responded to it a month ago or so when it was making the rounds, and it really does fit the discussion. Thank you for introducing that. If others can pick up on that, this is very much the kind of idea of what different islands or groups have alliances together and ought to be finding, who else ought to be here, what other conversations are connected. So Bernard, I don't know who is next, but Bernard, and then Bill.
Thank you. I love the question about theories of change. My background is as a consulting social scientist, and for 40 or 45 years, I did consulting work from that broad perspective. I'm reminded of one of my heroes, Kurt Levine, who once said, "There's nothing as practical as a good theory." So I like the focus on theories of change. I'm not quite sure what movement I belong to, if I belong to any movement, but I offer a perspective which may be different from the perspective that many people hold here, which is to see the business sector as a potential force for real good. And the work that I and my colleagues are doing is about trying to develop tools and practices which resolve the tension for business between building a better world and being profitable, which I think is a very fundamental tension that most senior managers experience in the business sector. The groups that I think are close to the kind of work that we're doing are groups like the Economics of Mutuality and the Creating Shared Value Project, both of which are global initiatives. They're connected to places like Oxford and Harvard. We're connected to Case Western Reserve. And so that's a little bit about my background, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. I just say that what you're describing is the area of impact and the theory of change is very similar, to, of course, to Flourishing Enterprise Institute, where our concept of the theory of change is that there can be a movement toward organizations and institutions and large enterprises as the place for highest impact, for high leverage, because that's where we have most of our committed work and our participation with other people. And as organizations change in defined ways, and leadership can identify how to change business models, in the work that we've done with Anthony Upward on the Flourishing business model process. For example, these are tools and strategic practices that can shift organizations over time. And in the work that we're doing with Mark and the other municipalities work that Randy had mentioned, we view municipalities and cities as enterprises as well. So that's in a nutshell our theory of change. We have an image of it. We're really clear about where we think the impact would be. But that also wanted to put it in movement language, because I think the regeneration has become something of a movement too. And could these converge in a way to influence organizations?
Absolutely. And I'm fortunate to have a colleague with whom I'm collaborating right now to lift up a global network on regenerative business. And it's being hosted by the RSA, which is the Royal Society for Arts and Commerce.
Excellent. Excellent. That RSA. Okay. Who was it, Bill?
Yeah, so a couple of comments. One with regard to the theory of change. Many of you are familiar with Michael Quinn Patton, sort of a grandfather of evaluation, and he and I have been collaborating, and I put a link into a short video that we did where he talks about the evolution from goals to logic models to theories of change, and now to theories of transformation, which are bigger than a theory of change. And they're co-created frameworks around which many different efforts can align. And we talk in that, it's a 6-minute video, and we talk about strategy mapping as a key way of creating those theories of transformation. In terms of the discussion about the different kinds of movements that tie into this flourishing and resilience, most of my work has been in population health and social determinants of health, large system change. But the area that I'm most excited about is the research on early brain development, and how even in the first 2 months, providing stability and connection and reducing trauma can lead to so much of a more positive trajectory. And it can help offset some of the disadvantages that some people in different, subgroups of the population are experiencing, and those lead to further disparities and inequity. So the work on neuro nurturing to really build that early brain development as a way to close some of the disparities, I think, is part of helping communities to flourish. And so those are two different topics that are under discussion I wanted to share. And I shared a 2-minute video with Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry talking about the early brain development, and the video with me and Michael Quinn Patton.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks for bringing MQ Patton's work into the discussion. And with that, the theory of transformation is what we were calling the kind of projects that we were developing within Bounce Beyond, because we realized that, you know, the change for what type of larger transformation, and that was the scale of things that we were attempting to do. Put a link to that, because that was formative work even in this type of discussion. We're working with you know, nonprofits like an advisory group to for incubators for social change groups. That would be like this, that worked in, a lot of them that worked in regeneration or in landscape development, you know, large scale landscapes. Who else has a theory of change or approach with another approach that you're working with? I see like Douglas.
Peter, I just wanted to mention quickly, Frederick had his hand up for a bit, and Carrie had a comment in the chat questioning the idea of a theory of change, so maybe we can take that after Frederick.
Sounds good.
Be great. Thanks.
Frederick. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for taking part in this meeting. Frederick Peters, I found myself after doing my PhD, sort of meeting up with Anthony Upward and the Flourishing Enterprise Institute, and I've been looking as I guess a consulting political scientist. I've also became a planner, and I have an opportunity that I've been talking to Randy and sent Tim an email about that allows me maybe something exciting where I can try to build up this team using a lot of the language and the theoretical frameworks that we've discussed, you know, applied research projects. So the CMHC, so Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, is looking for projects that deal with affordable housing. I see affordable housing as a very, very small part of a flourishing society, and have the opportunity, if the CMHC wants to support it, to work with the community in Malvern, which is northern Scarborough, the eastern edge of Toronto, and to try to reframe the discussion from affordable housing, what the CMHC wants, into sort of affordable communities. And with that, I'm trying to code sort of flourishing into the kind of language. If this works, then what I'm hoping is that I can get that discourse up to the level of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, so that we speak more about what a social scientist would call social reproduction and affordable and flourishing social reproduction than merely the question of the housing. You know, it's not merely the rent or the rent and the utilities. It's in fact the framework of the entire thing under the way that social reproduction functions. So I'm hoping to connect the developers who own a certain property up in Malvern with the community, and do so in a sort of a big tent approach to try to bring together various sort of stakeholders, not just shareholders. And right now, I think the Federation of Metro Tenants Associations is acting as my home base. And so over the next little while, I'll be reaching out again to Randy and to Tim, if I get a go-ahead, to try to help me frame some of this discussion, working with the community, and taking inspiration from your Kitchener and your, your British Columbia example. Remind me the city, forgive me.
Nanaimo.
Nanaimo, thank you. I was afraid to get that wrong. So to try to take that and apply it not to a whole municipality, but to a certain smaller part of the northern half of one of the wards in the city of Toronto, trying to make something work and shift the discourse to try to make the applied research project. And with that, follow like the discussion of the theories of change, systems thinking, the complete picture, food systems, transport systems, employment opportunities for young people, transit access, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm working on right now, and it's just right now it's a grant application, but if it goes ahead, then then there's further support to be found for this, and a lot of inspiration I've taken from this group. So that's sort of an explanation and a thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Frederick. It was good to know about that initiative, and that seems to have a lot of connection to our development of what we call the systemic management innovations, which are then tools for mindset change and for process change at the higher levels within organizations to start to shape their understanding of how these impacts could occur. See, Daniel has joined us now, so we're at a point where we could move from the whole group dialogue to a more focused dialogue, and also now we've kind of warmed you all up with also some ideas around the same kinds of questions around flourishing and regeneration and relevant other movements and directions that you're working with that have convergence and theories of change. But was there anyone else that wanted to share before we shift over? I did want to give a kind of a nod to John Ehrenfeld, because we are talking about flourishing enterprises, and John was co-author in the first book on that with Chris Laszlo, or part of the flourishing enterprise development at Fowler Institute in Case Western. And so so if you have a question or a contribution on that, John, or maybe save that as we ask questions of Daniel. Okay, so thank you. Daniel Christian Wahl, can we shift now to you? We have a group of people in today's cafe interested in the questions around the evolution of regeneration, and reintroduce you into the group.
Can I just quickly check? Am I an hour late? Because I just got this email. Like I've been trying to take some time out in the garden, just got back in and got this email. We're starting now, which was sent 50 minutes ago. Have we had some kind of lost in translation between
time zones? Yes.
Time zones. Sorry. Deep apologies. I wasn't aware I was late. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I actually pictured you might be doing. We're out in the outdoors somewhere, because I had responded when I saw the mismatch in your email to confirm this morning. Daniel, I had replied as soon as I could, but because I'm in Central Time, I'm in Mexico City, my response was very late, and so and you have a lot of land to work with, so I would imagine. Thanks for joining us. And what we'd like to do then is, if you can if you're actually prepared to stay longer than, if this is actually the start of your expectation for the 90 minutes, if instead, we don't want to keep everyone that much later, but we've had a conversation here kind of in preparation and a dialogue with similar questions that I want to pose with you. So if I just invite for others to stay, but Tim, in terms of the convening of the session, we want to certainly allow for people to gracefully exit at their expected departure time, which might be on the hour. So what do you think, Tim?
Absolutely. I think we can do that and still, keep the opportunity open for people to stay on a bit longer for whoever can. And Daniel, welcome firstly also from my side. It's great to have you, and thanks for being with us. And if you'd be prepared to go over the full hour, as maybe was your expectation, then I think we can do that. That'd be amazing.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So now I'd like to introduce Daniel and also then introduce the questions. So I'll shorten this part of it. But we've had more of a circle dialogue where we had everybody in gallery mode. So so Tim or Manal, or could you put Daniel on spotlight in Zoom, and so that we can, we're not going to be using any slides or screen sharing, I don't think. Unless there, so this will be just, you know, in the conversation. So I'd like to, you know, for those who don't know, who don't know Daniel, first of all, he's, you know, there's a link to the bio, but just to kind of put the introduction into the room to start with, and Daniel, you can update this. He's, you know, has a background in biology and a PhD in design from Dundee, as well as Schumacher College, master's degree in was holistic science. He's been a leader in education and in the development of the concepts and the movement of regenerative design. And as that's becoming something of a disciplinary, an area that now other designers and scientists are working in. I'm at Tec de Monterrey in Mexico City. I have colleagues that are professors in regenerative design now that are very new in the last couple of years. You know, Daniel's worked with a lot of different groups and advisories, but what I really appreciate, and I wish that I had been at Findhorn recently, is a director of Findhorn College in the early 2000s, and has continued to work with Findhorn as a fellow, Findhorn Foundation Fellow. Findhorn was very influential in my early years with the Spanglers and the Eileen Katie and Peter and I mean, just from my own learning. So you've done a lot. Also, the book Designing Regenerative Cultures had a huge impact. Probably a lot of us have it in our bookshelves and are familiar with it. And then, you know, there's been a recent change in the Schumacher College, so maybe that also changes your relationship to teaching there too. And, you know, if you have a little time at the end, I'd like to hear an update about that. But I'd like to just see if you'd like to add to that, if there's anything kind of new and breaking news that you'd like to introduce, and then anything else you'd like to say, and then I'll ask a couple of questions to get us started.
Maybe I'll just say that over the years, ever since I've become a father and a custodian of land, my audacity for the potential impact of design has kind of shifted into more humility. I'm working much more with the land, with learning from half a hectare of Mallorca as I try to coax it back to a higher state of vitality and diversity. And yeah, so I'm a little bit in a personal reconsidering phase of how much power of intervention and agency we actually still have at this point in human history. So if we go into that a little bit, that would also be really interesting.
Oh, yeah. I can appreciate that, being what's they call me a distinguished professor, and I have to be humble about that. I try to say it means you're old, but you hopefully have learned some things as you know, over these different stages of contribution and all that. So I appreciate that also as a perspective that you can bring into the dialogue. I'd like to, without too much further kind of background, which I had planned, I'd like to just jump into the questions and take it from there. I'd like to continue from the context of the dialogue that we have with the group, and now to open that to you and to explore how regenerative design is evolving and kind of our places in it, and perhaps the different names as well, like what we've considered. There is a flourishing movement that is inspired, you know, really by the change in thinking we had, Anthony Upward, Randy Saad, me, and others that are in the FEI, for example. But our group was called the Strongly Sustainable Business Model Research Group, you know, over a decade ago. And we landed, and we just couldn't, you can't describe strong sustainability very well to people that you're trying to inspire. And John Ehrenfeld's concept of the, sustainable development is only sustaining development. If you look at that, we've got to find a way to move beyond that and to envision sustaining what we want to flourish. And your concept is worded in, your ideas are worded in very similar ways. If we had heard yours first, who knows? So, I think these are very parallel. So I'd like to continue from this kind of place, these ideas that sustainability is not enough, that we need regenerative cultures. Those are your words, your ideas. Mm-hmm. The word sustainability is adequate. It does not describe what we're actually trying to sustain. Place-sourced regenerative design is a site for human and planetary health. These are aspirations that we all share. So we'd like to just ask you to share a kind of personal summary of the state of regenerative design as of this year, and how you see this, where we are, and if there's a movement, how that's influencing other groups, places, people, organizations.
Wow, there's a lot of places I could go with this. My sense is that there's definitely something bubbling up, and it's bubbling up in different ways in different places, often drawing from slightly different sources. And so to call it a movement, I'm not sure yet, because a movement for me brings up some form of connectedness, and that's to my mind still forming in the field. Like there are people in academia, as you have pointed out, that are beginning to use that term to explore a new angle on design. But there are also lots of people who are more in a practitioner mode out there working with communities that are exploring regenerative design as part of their practice. And for me, maybe the most important thing to always highlight these days, because even in the phrase sustainability is not enough, we need regenerative cultures, which is my phrase, you're right. For most people, when they hear that phrase, they can easily go into the space that regenerative culture is a new kind of future state utopia that we yet need to create and that has never been around. And that we need design and designers and technology and all of that to create that future vision. And actually, what my work is about is trying to remember that for the longest part of human history, we have been regenerative cultures that were living expressions of the places they inhabited. That regenerative design as such, if you want to call design what Bill McDonough so beautifully said, the first signal of human intention, ever since we first spat against the hand and created that image on the cave wall, we have been asking the question, how do we participate in this larger being that we are part of? And at some point, we shifted perspective and created an other. And that being was suddenly objectified. And we had the Enlightenment, and we had technology and science, and wonderful things happened. But we're trapped in that narrative that there's a world out there that we can do something to. And so for me, part of regenerative design is recovering that deeper, humble practice of, if we're emergent properties of a nested complex dynamic system, how that we can't predict and control, and we're actually expressions of it, then yes, we have some agency, as everything else in that system has, but we're also being acted upon by that system all the time. So half of what we do isn't our intentionality, isn't design, is just the system playing out through us. And for me, that's a big shift that I've got to in the last year and a half through conversations with Nora Bateson and Bayo Akomolafe. They really challenged my own notion of agency. I suddenly realized how fundamental agency is to this whole thing that is systems design or anything like that. And I would say that,
you mean the ability to do interventions, the framing of particular changes that we believe will be, intentional outcomes, this kind of way of working with agency as an intentionality, as opposed to more systemically within, closer to the movements of nature and cycles of culture?
Well, I think it's, of course, if you're designing a pair of skis made out of hemp, like my friend Tobias, then you have a very specific thing, and you can make it touch a very scale linking, holistic understanding of design, but it's manageable. But if you're looking at complex dynamic systems, not just product design, but how do we reorganize our way of being in the world, then design interventions are of a very different nature. They're changes in narrative. What in my PhD I called it meta design, leaning a little bit on the work of John Wood and others. Like it's upstream from design being manifest through physicality, objects, institutions, products, all that kind of design. It's the organizing ideas and concepts we use to even relate to the world and position ourselves. It's basically ontological and epistemological reframing. And that is the most powerful design, but it's very difficult to do. It takes decades to infiltrate, like the whole notion of salutogenic design that I worked with for 3 years in the run-up to my PhD. I think now is beginning to be at a point where we could revisit it, and that's what, like, I would love to have the time to do it and put it in relationship to regenerative design, because for me, ultimately, it's still the same question. If we want to do regenerative design, it's design that fits in, and it has to fit into place and bioregion, and therefore it has to be context specific and deeply relational, both with the natural environment and the social and economic environment of that place. It's not some kind of blueprint that a great designer can do in one place and then repeat in another. And the type of intervention is much more humble in the sense of suggesting, testing, dancing with the system, rather than more from the engineering standpoint, well, if you just change these levers. And precisely what we're trying to do, Tobias and I, with the course at ETH, is to keep that bridge open, to see what are the science tools and the hard data, and maybe even, it's not my favorite, the AI tools that are coming in now, that one can play with, but also on the other end of the spectrum, bring in Nora Bateson, Bayo Komolafe, David Abram, and reframe the whole epistemological narrative of to what extent is systems design even possible, and how do we position ourselves in the system, as Nora Bateson calls it, to ready ourselves for change rather than define ourselves as change makers. And it's beautiful to see in the course that we're currently running how, of course, being an ETH course, it attracts really high profile people that have already a career behind them, and to see how open they are, particularly people that come out of hard engineering backgrounds that have been in charge of managing real complexity and unpredictability, and have realized there are no better programs and no better algorithms that will wrestle predictability and controllability from a complex dynamic system. And so they've hit that glass ceiling of what science and technology are capable within their frame, and are interested in being stimulated. And so for me, that's currently what regenerative design is. But then if you ask my friends at Regenesis Group or people at the RCA or RSA, they would all tell you something slightly different. So a long way of saying far from a movement, but an exploration.
Yes, interesting. So the idea of hitting the glass ceiling within the science, technology, and engineering, resonates with some of us, I think, in the FEI room, and some of the participants here, including John Ehrenfeld, as a leading industrial ecologist, in developing that field at MIT, and then writing the work on flourishing. And that is, and there are others, that I know that, in a room, as we were talking about, the different areas that we're still working in. There are scientists, engineers, people who work, with organizations and leadership and management. I wanted to ask you too, how you work with natural scientists, other biologists, ecologists, or engineers in this realm. Are you working with multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary groups that really get this, this vision? Are they becoming regenerative, or is this becoming, or do you bring these ideas into some science and engineering projects that can start to shift the way that they intervene or work?
But to some extent, Tobias has given me this wonderful opportunity to help him curate.
Tobias Lute, I would say.
Tobias
Lute,
yeah. Thank you.
Also,
Tobias Lute
in
from
systemic
ETH.
design.
Tobias Lute, we met at a very interesting conference at the Oracle in Delphi. Very interesting place to meet.
Yeah.
He proposed whether I would help him set up this series of massive open online courses, of which we've created conceptually 4, but so far have run 2, some of them a number of times, and the 3rd one is coming online now. But that course in the last 3 years has created some 7,000 or 8,000 people who've taken it from 113 countries. And in many ways, we're trying to explore building a community, both on the Mighty Network side, which is designing resilient regenerative systems, and through the ETH courses, of people to really explore this, because we're not pretending we know. And the people that are signing up for this course are coming from so many different disciplines, and have not just the academic disciplines, but also the practical experience in applying it in their job behind them, because it's a advanced studies program. That it's almost in that field that I find the most open collaboration of different disciplines being possible. If I look here where I work locally in Mallorca, in trying to bring these kind of collaborations together, they become possible if you find individuals in a particular department that you can really work with. But very often I still also bump against people, particularly people who know a lot within the silo of their own discipline, not quite being at that point of, like, what I've noticed through this course with ETH is that when people are really good at what they're doing, then they can also fundamentally question it. When people are pretty damn good at what they're doing, but they're not quite at that level yet, they can use what they know as something they defend themselves within. And it's very hard to do real transdisciplinary work with people that are still kind of saying, yeah, but in ecology, the data says this. And the problem is that all the scientists quote data and quote papers as if they're quoting some form of truth. They've all forgotten the humble sentence that a good scientist should put with everything: to the best of our knowledge at this point in time, we believe that it's likely that. We don't really, like, so much of the data we refer our as the basis of our action is data that has been collected in a very limited frame. In order to be able to be statistically analyzable, it's data that has only looked at very specific things over a specific time frame in a specific context. And then on top of it, it has done the classic standardization process, is it looked at mediums and means. It shaves away the ends of the bell curve. And regenerative design looks at not the abstract and general, but the specific in context. So it's very interested in the ends of the bell curve. So it's a very, very different way of working.
Yeah. I'll just add, we had a bit of a plug earlier for the RSD the RSD 13 conference, that the symposium that will be held in Oslo. And Tobias, was at AHO, was one of the people in the organization for that. And he and I will be speaking about our different approaches to the educational platforms in systemic design, yours being one of them with that. So you might know about that talk. I think that's going to be on like Sunday, October 12th, but you would see it we'll put a link in the chat. I know Cheryl May would have the right date for that, so I'm not looking at the calendar. But I wanted to say that, this is one of these very good convergence points, because these are different approaches that are working towards similar ends, and that I think are movement-like in that lots of people are now they're starting to grow. They're starting to get some critical mass. I wanted to shift
just briefly before you go there, just wanted to highlight, like, we're all working in this, exploring this together. Like, I've been part of I think I've been into 2 of the Sustainable Business Model Working Group webinars ages ago with Anthony, and also I think you work a lot with Stephen Davis in Canada and
yes.
Glenn Page.
Yes.
It's really, that's for me the community of practice that is exploring the regenerative design, regenerative development, the more place-sourced, deeper way of working out of context and not in the abstract. Just wanted to highlight that to contextualize. And also really honored. I saw that John Ehrenfeld is actually on the call, because definitely one of the wise elders of this movement.
Oh, I'm glad you noticed. That's why I wasn't name dropping him with his absence. I'm realizing that, and hoping he has the first question. So folks, we will open to your questions soon. So in the group, go ahead, and if Tim didn't say, but you can put them in the chat, and we can start to look at questions that you can ask. So I wanted to shift a bit from those aspects, the kind of collaboration, evolution, but then where can people like us who are working in different enterprises and organizations find opportunities for more leverage? That is, if you'd say from a theory of change perspective, where our theory of change is, as you might guess from our positioning, is that organizations, enterprises, and municipalities, large places of working together, are places, sites that we can work with that will have significant impact over time. People don't necessarily have to become completely like-minded working with each other, but they learn from each other and make substantive decisions that have impact on products, services, contributions, strategies, whether they're a commercial enterprise, a corporation, or in, a work in city management. And so we work with those different groups from this organization as the site of change. So we need to work with leadership to do so. And so I want to hear your thoughts on working with leadership, but also I know it's a slow process. We can inspire them, and then, what happens? So, where have you seen regenerative work or not work in these types of large organizations? Are we getting the message across? Are we?
Well, my sense is, like, I'm gonna answer slightly tangentially. Just before the summer, I was in Helsinki, invited by Citra to take part in a conference, and also had this wonderful opportunity to speak to 25 people of this Finnish People's Futures Fund. The whole idea that a country at the anniversary of its constitution took out $1 billion from its national budget, gave it to its people in order to establish a foundation that would work for the future of that country and understanding the future. Chapeau. And to have an opportunity to work, to actually have a conversation with people whose job it has been to explore, both in scenarios and all sorts of different ways, where we're at and where we might be going. And suddenly I felt myself for the first time in a long time in an environment where I could say something that I'm just going to say again to all of you now, which is, I think all of these conversations really depend on how deeply we admit that the time for action to save the current core patterns that we call the system that we're embedded in is over. And that's the difference between my attitude in 2016 when I talked about a window of opportunity that we could maybe do something, and that was already very hopeful, on the edge of peddling hopium. And since then, so little has happened apart from Trump and Ukraine and the pandemic and more polarization and the exact opposite of what we should have done, that I think all these conversations, who do we influence? How do we influence? How do we make change? Maybe we need to radically localize and regionalize and say, what can we still do to build the resilience infrastructures and the social capabilities for people to be aware that they might within their lifetime be challenged to see something fundamentally new, as old structures simply have to break down because they're so deeply unsustainable. And what do we do then as a culture? And this is a fundamental question. The way we design answers will be very different whether we admit that it's not 5 to 12, it's 25 past 1. And the way we deploy resources, maybe the last time we actually have an opportunity to deploy resources, will be also different. So it really matters to, and I say this with the complete awareness that being a prophet of doom doesn't help anybody, and going to kind of it's all over darkness doesn't help. But at the same time, to pretend that we can just look at examples of, it's always the same question, which business is the best example for regenerative business? Which organization is the best regenerative organization? And ultimately, we're all so deeply bound in a system that has structural violence, racism, all sorts of things, the remnants of colonialism. Even if we still work with the map that we call the nations of the world, all those borders have been drawn by power over structures and are meta designs of the last 250, 300, in some cases a bit longer years. Redesigning the human presence on Earth for us to become a regenerative keystone species in every ecosystem again needs us to question all of that. And do I believe we're going to do that in time before life's going to teach us a hard lesson? Probably not. Oops, drop the bomb.
Oh, this is a perfect point. We're actually at the top of the hour and can maybe take a breath and take a deep breath and see what questions people might have for Daniel, and to shift from kind of my half hour with you to, as long as people are willing to stay, but I would suggest that up to a half hour just for, the extension of the time that we've asked of people as well. So if you now for the questions you have and for continuing the dialogue with, with the whole room, virtual room, Tim, let me have you kind of, because you're working more with the whole room here. Can you see Anthony has a question and others might, but Anthony, we'll start with you, and Tim, if you want to see who else is lining up with the questions too.
Let me just quickly jump in, Peter. We'll do exactly that. I just wanted to say, we've had a great conversation in the chat. So I'm very encouraged by the participation. And so I just want to ask people to, if they like, turn some of these contributions into questions for the discussion with Daniel. So we'll take Anthony first, but there's some time now for everyone else to kind of see how they'd engage directly in the discussion. There's been so much rich content that I'd love to bring that into our conversation here. So
Nice.
let's move
Anthony.
on to Anthony.
Nice
Hi, Daniel.
to see you, Anthony.
Very nice to see you as well. And thank you for your remarks so far. Really, really interesting. I think I've been on a similar journey. I think R3.0 has been talking about collapse awareness and collapse acceptance and others as well. So I totally get that. And I just shared a video in the chat by Joe Brewer that he did with R3.0 on the latest of the biophysical sciences and what those actually are saying is happening to the world. So I recommend that for anybody. So my question, for people like me who are very much in working in the practical field of business models, in my case, what's your current best advice for people like us working in that field, given the realities that you've just been describing?
Well, one thing that I always say to people about who work at the scale of a business or the design of a business model is, it's an interesting experience that friends of mine in Germany had who were very successful kind of startup entrepreneurs. Then they did a lot of incubating of businesses in the tech space, got really good at running incubators and made some good money and decided they were going to take that skill to Africa and as an NGO to just see whether they could help incubate businesses in Africa. And very quickly, they realized that in order to incubate a business idea in Africa, you have to incubate an entire context. So you have to build 15 companies that somehow are all interrelated. And so you're not innovating a business model anymore. You're innovating an ecosystem where the identity of the business is less important than the relationships in the ecosystem. And this is a page out of the little booklet, which is quite nice. I think it's called Regenerative Business by Ethan Rowland and Gregory Landor. They wrote it relatively quickly, but one of the real kind of Zen sticks that I got from that book was that it had the sentence, design for your own death in the business model design. And for me, that's really important in terms of when we move from not designing businesses anymore, but entire regenerative enterprise ecosystems that are deeply rooted in place and context and are providing the kind of disaster preparedness, stroke resilience, stroke relocalization of production and consumption, then we can create a culture from the start in which people don't have to be worried that if their business has done its bit in developing the ecosystem, that it shuts down. And the skills get taken up by the network of relationality that is place-bound and not a kind of digital, global, blah, blah, blah. And for me, that's the advice. We still need those business models. We still need new models of ownership to make them possible. We need new forms of capital engagement, ideally community and regionally based. And there's, as you know, there are lots of people working on that in different fields. And the puzzle, that the Tetris is self-assembling, but will it self-assemble before we get our massive Zen stick? That's the question.
Thanks, Daniel. That was very helpful.
Yeah. Really nice to see you again. It's been ages, too long. We should have a chat.
We should.
Yeah. And also for everybody who's not aware of this, like Anthony and I met in person through the R.O kind of network, and it's really also a part of this wider map what they're doing, and highly recommend their work.
Which we could say, yeah, that is a current conference now. So right,
yeah.
That and then RSD next month, and there really is a lot of opportunity for discussion. So let me call on Donna, and why don't you ask your question, and Tim, if there are others that have been changed in the chat, we can draw on. So.
It really is a cafe. I'm just talking to people I already know. Hi, Donna.
Wonderful to see you, Daniel. And, you know, one of the themes that has run throughout your work for years is living the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really appreciate every time you show up is the way that you invite us to live the questions and to recognize that there aren't these pat definitive answers. And you speak to the humility, you speak to the you know, the learning journey, the humility. And I'm really, as you know, I'm really appreciating you dialing that up in a world that still makes it hard for people to do that. And, you know, where people continue to put folks like you on the spot around, well, how do we do this? So what I've also been really appreciating that you've been emphasizing is how we need to live into that future, holding the tension of, on the one hand, the despair that's there around the real fragility and where we, you know, where we really are, and at the same time grounded active hope.
Mm-hmm.
And not getting locked into our terminology, and yet at the same time excavating underneath the surface of some of those words, where more of us are finding that common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I just want to pick up on, and there is a question in here, I suppose, which has to do with we're reframing everything. We're needing to reframe and rethink freaking everything, including our business models and how to design at the ecosystem layer where people come together with interdependence around flourishing and well-being, including funding flowing and poly capital models. So we're also at this point where there's been years and years of research done on economic models, on commoning, all this stuff. Now is the time for experimentation, what's safe to try, living labs that are context-based and place-sourced, without saying this is the holy grail, but rather grounding some of these and learning through embodied experience. So I know there's not much of a question.
No, but it's a really interesting area you sort of staked out, because it's a real dance. Like, even talking a little bit out of specifics, like as Tobias Luth and I were developing our approach to this MOOC series and also to the CAS, that whatever we would teach in the content teaching of the MOOC, the students would have a personal quest journey, so it would always be reflective on the personal level and relevant to their life in application. But in order for those who might not really find it easy to apply immediately, to also give them two landscapes where Tobias is working in the Upper Po Valley and where I'm working here on Mallorca, to just contextualize this in. And that's also why the field trips are part of the design. And in the process of this, we worked a lot with bioregional weaving lab as a concept that we wanted to actually work with. And then, as happens, people pick up words and take them. Suddenly, Ashoka and Commonland did this partnership and created the bioregional weaving lab after they had already created the weaving lab sometime earlier, after a meeting that I was also part of. And instead of getting all competitive about the name or anything, we just decided, let's sidestep that whole conversation and just call the same thing that we're working on Living Systems Explorer or Living Systems Lab. And initially that's came out of that necessity because that had happened. But since then, it actually made me realize how, even with, and I'm a big proponent, as you know, of the bioregional regeneration focus, the danger is that we collapse it into that story and we make it oversimplistic of like just a bunch of hippies in a territory running a school and making a few things doesn't necessarily change an entire territory. It's a good impulse. It's creating community, but again, it can be over communicated as we are restoring 200,000 hectares. For me, that's dangerous. So simply working in context with people and saying, we don't know, but we're going to keep exploring what it would mean to create more resilience, a healthier ecosystem, a healthier social dynamic, a healthier local economy that is not as fragile as the current one, not as dependent. In most places, we have skewed economies that are dependent on long supply lines and very brittle. So how can we dance with this, that we're still trapped within the dynamics of a system that is at that collapse chaos point in the adaptive cycle, but begin to innovate at a scale where we can actually show that there is still some action despite the fact that it's 1. And then, but to tie the loop here, for me, calling it regenerative living systems explorer or living systems labs allows us to bring in what is actually also core in my early PhD work in terms of design for human and planetary health, the notion of scale linking and pulsing between the scales. So even if, yes, we need to relocalize, and to relocalize, we have to do it in a bioregional landscape scale context. And we need to not heal the planet, but we need to heal places, again, at the landscape scale, bioregional scale. But we don't need to suddenly say the UN is bad, all nation states are bad, we just have to do this local thing, because, and this is what John Ehrenfeld, I would love to have his take on this, the early industrial ecologists understood that the biggest bang for the buck in terms of changing our systems of production and consumption is to close the loops at the smallest level possible, local and regional, which means shifting our entire production system. But we've, of course, created a modern high-tech culture that we now would need a very nuanced dialogue of what level of mining and what level of globality and material flows is necessary at a drastically reduced level to enable these radically relocalizing regional economies to still maintain a certain level of comfort for their population. And that's where, again, the collapse awareness would change how we deploy the resources we've got left. If at the UN level, we would finally say, let's stop that we're running towards the cliff, like we're over the cliff. And what are we going to do about it now? And then we could begin to really have, because the danger is that we're going to have a pendulum swing from globalization to ultra kind of localism. Every ism is a schism, like bioregionalism. So how do we avoid that and say, yes, we need to create systems of production and consumption that are predominantly local and regional, but what enables that, and what technologies and what resource flows enable that? Anyway, I'll get off my hobby horse. Carrie, another person I know. Hello.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to see you. Sorry, I didn't realize I was next in line. Okay, well, this is all very profound, and I appreciate too. You're living the questions and always evolving your thinking. I've literally never. I mean, I've heard you talk about the same themes twice, but I'm always hearing you learning out loud, which I think is something very instructive for all of us.
Yeah.
So, to this point you just made, okay, what level of mining is acceptable? I guess I know that wasn't a complete thought, but of course, I start thinking about planetary boundaries in this context, which I also know is very reductionist. But it seems to me, production and consumption if we continue to center production and consumption,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's a challenge. And so I guess, you know, I keep thinking about this idea of like, well, how little can we take? You know, because we've all these things talk about how far can we go, how much more can we extract, and you know, not to lift up the degrowth potential controversy, but it's like, how that's the conversation I'm really interested in having. How can we have a deep conversation about because we've had 30 years to do degrowth. We haven't done it. Our consumption is growing, not shrinking. And so we, you know, that will, if we stop short of like easing our way into this, we're going to get even further collapse and calamitous collapse. But just how can we reconcile that?
We can't. I mean, you're absolutely right to point that out. But then again, just as we need degrowth, rapid degrowth, but degrowth could also, degrowth, post-growth, all of that can vilify growth as something that isn't necessary. But we, of course, need growth of healthy ecosystems, topsoil, forest cover, grassland diversity, all of that. So, and we will need production and consumption because we are a species that consumes certain things. So we need to have that question of how do we wiser produce at what scale and where. And I just put into the chat a couple of articles that were written ages ago. And the second one, inspired by what you were just saying, that in 2020, I had the opportunity to, like, I even put on a white shirt for it, to interview Professor Dennis Meadows, which for me was like, wow, talking to the annals of history. And since basically he was part of the report that 50 years ago made it clear we can't continue like this. And as you right pointed out, we've had UN meetings and lots of people made a career out of selling some ideas of how to do it differently, me included, but nothing has really happened to change it. And yet, we're still at a point where we can build the lifeboats for whatever comes after us. And whether that's for our species alone, I don't think so. I mean, I often, and now I'm going to take it even deeper, I believe on a deeper level, for our species to find a pathway through the eye of the needle that we're now facing, we have to actually have the dialogue of how would we act if we knew that we're not going to make it? And how would we still act in service of life as a whole for those generations we've got left? And I think if we got to that point of maturity to have that dialogue, then we might find a pathway through the eye of the needle. And similarly, in that, to come back to the production and consumption issue, it needs what Nate Hagen calls the great simplification. It needs the conversation about what technology and what level of production and consumption do we actually need. And at the same time, let's not put everything in a bin and become ultra Luddites again. Yeah? But we do need to question these off-planet fantasies of billionaires that we celebrate as the epitome of success instead of examples of like that, the outgrowths, the carbuncles of a fundamentally non-sustainable system. Like there is no such thing as a regenerative billionaire, like impossible. There's just too much inequality in the system. And so all of the, but I think we can readdress so many of these issues of how resources have been plundered from the global north and are still, through structural violence, still being plundered from the global south by the global north. If we create a level of global collaboration at the bioregional scale, meaning we really take the political notion of subsidiarity serious, and all levels of governance at the national and supranational scale are subsidiary in service to helping people in place to build their fundamental resilience towards fundamental change and to regenerate their destroyed social cohesion, the destroyed ecosystem, the destroyed local economies that we have basically eroded over the last 100 years of unbridled extractive capitalism. That shut everybody up.
Yeah. Who else? This has been an amazing conversation. So thanks for those questions. But yeah, who's with us? Who would like to?
I'll quickly pipe up, Peter.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Randy, please.
Yeah, Daniel, very nice to have you and to finally meet directly. So well, perhaps you didn't hear me introduce myself either, given that you weren't here at the start. So I'm the executive director of the Flourishing Enterprise Institute. It's a pleasure. I wanted to get your reaction or response to some of what is embodied in, the purpose of the FEI and what we envision as something like a theory of change. So there's perhaps two main elements. I mean, when we talk about the sort of complexity involved in the transition of systems from the current state to one of flourishing or regeneration, part of our belief and why we focus on the enterprise scale is that we see the enterprise as a high leverage point. Of course, we can have ground up movements, we can work with individuals in community, we can work with big national governments and international agencies, and much to do with the necessity of being context specific and locally oriented. Our belief is that the highest leverage point, or the place we can make change the fastest, is at the organizational scale, and that it will be many organizations over time in combination or in complement that lead to larger systemic change at higher magnitudes or in more broad strokes. And inside of that, and this is reflected through much of our collaboration with R3.0 and others, we've been focusing for the last 4 or 5 years now on the municipal organization as the highest leverage point within the context of enterprises or in the field of enterprises, for all the reasons I'm sure you can imagine, including the fact that part of the function and capability and strength of a municipality is its ability to convene and facilitate. So they have policy levers, they can make direct investments, and they essentially have direct relationships with almost any stakeholder, actor, or organization within a local community. So much of our focus, especially because municipalities are explicitly and very much outwardly focused on outcomes across the triple bottom line, is to help them recognize and appreciate the complexity they're navigating, the inadequacy of conventional best practice in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, and the opportunity in leveraging more systemic management innovations and beginning the process of learning and experimenting in practice by doing things dramatically differently as a means for, essentially stewarding them towards becoming system actors that are enabling of change across a community. So that's a lot of what we're holding right now, and that is central in the paths that we're going, the projects that we're working on. And I'm just curious what your reaction is, what's perhaps missing in what I've described, if there's a fatal flaw, or maybe just other considerations that we should hold more highly based on your perspective of what I've just shared.
I mean, I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to tell you what to do differently, but I can say that everything you said, I completely and utterly believed in when, for example, while I was living in Scotland, where public servants are truly public servants. Here in Spain, they call themselves funcionarios. You spot the difference, slightly different attitude. But we ran with a United Nations Institute of Training and Research affiliation trainings in whatever, sustainable islands, renewable energy, hydrogen corridor, all that kind of stuff and we worked with, it was the groups were always local businesses and local authority at the local and regional scale, and sometimes the Scottish national scale. And there were lots of really well-meaning people and a big buzz in the room for each one of those meetings, but I haven't really seen much shift out of that. And since 10 years ago, 12 years ago by now, I moved to Mallorca because it's a bounded bioregion, and I have a deep-seated love for the Mediterranean that is rooted in my childhood. I've been trying to do the same thing that you just described, and I've worked with the sustainable business cluster in the tourism industry and with all sorts of public actors. And I find that because I've shifted my perspective of how much time we've got to fundamentally do things differently, I'm less patient with those processes, because I've seen how even if you identify the willing individuals and you begin to build a narrative at the local or regional government level, and you bring in a few local businesses to do something. We were at the verge of that when we had Ecovare experimenting with local production for local consumption with local businesses here on the island. It just like those projects seed ideas and people do other things that are also positive. So you can see that silver lining to their failure, but they never really change things. In my experience, or I've never managed to do it. And so where I'm personally at now is to both at the personal level of what I do with the land I steward, at the neighborhood scale of how I relate to my immediate neighbors, and at the community bioregional scale, I just try to work with the people who are already actively building the new. I don't try to build theories of change to change the old, because that's where I believe Nora Bateson is right with the readying. We don't have to convince them. The entire cart house is going to collapse, and they will be convinced by necessity. And so, and they're lovely, good human beings. We need to be ready to pick them up and include them in our work at the local and regional scale, but we don't need to go and convince them, because even if we do, because of the way that system is structured, they run against the glass ceiling with somebody from up top telling, oh, well, now you're getting a little bit too experimental, Dale. That's against national regulation XYZ. So I know it sounds a bit jaded and kind of burnt out with those processes, but maybe I am. I saw that John had his fingers up. Could I, or his hand up? I would love to give John an opportunity. Thank you for joining, and lovely to see you.
I'm happy to chime in for a moment. This has been great, and I really appreciate being part of this community, even though it's dropped in on a sort of random basis. But I completely agree with what you've been telling us. I think, I've been retired for a long time, so I'm not terribly active in the same sense that you are. But what I see and hear, I think you're right on, that we're making one mistake after another. That even asking the question or couching it in terms of sort of, well, let's learn how to change from here to there. I think that's the wrong thing. I don't think we have any control over that. I think the big question is what Daniel spoke of toward the end of his talk, and that is, what's there? We really have to think of the there that we want to get to, or that we can get to. I'm not sure we can. I think, one of the problems of complexity is it takes you in directions and places that you have no idea you were going in the first place. So part of it is sort of accepting that. And that will give you a whole different context in which you're going to start asking the question, okay, where are we likely to go? Where would we like to go? And then begin to I think, do the only thing you can, and that is what I hear here, and I think that's really great, is you have to try things. I mean, this is the science ain't going to help us a damn bit, and except it may help set some additional conditions. It may help sort of simplify the choices that you have, trying to figure out, well, if we try this, it's probably a better start to the process. But you know, I'm a pusher for pragmatism. I don't hear the word enough. You know, all we have is the best, being the smartest we possibly can. The idea of bringing people together. I think the big benefit, no one mentioned it, is that you kind of can create a collective sense of wisdom that you can't get by just going into the laboratory. And that's really essential in creating a pragmatic capability to do the best you can, guessing, oh, let's try this, let's try that. And then you have all those eyes, ears, and brains looking at what's happening and making more sense, again, than you can by putting it in a laboratory. So I think this is a wonderful talk, Christian. I'm not as familiar with your work as I should be, but I will be after this talk. But it's certainly consistent with what I've been writing about now for what? Oh, it's, I don't know, too long, 20 years or more.
Or more, I would say.
Anyway, thanks for letting me know and letting me be part of this community. Thanks.
Thank you. No, it's really, I'm reminded of a quote that I use a lot from Bayo Komolafe. It's a question, and I love questions, as some of you know. Maybe the way we're dealing with the crisis is part of the crisis. And I think that there's so much in there. And it's a kind of daily practice of unlearning to actually find yourself doing it over and over and over again. Old patterns that we've sucked in with the mother's milk and cultural context for so long that we don't even see it anymore. And yeah, the conversation I shared with Dennis Meadows, it was shocking to see how this man had also lost. Like he admits openly that he feels like his entire life he's been trying to sound an alarm bell and it hasn't made any difference whatsoever. He actually says, I don't know whether anything I've done has had any systemic impact. What's that for a theory of change and systemic intervention? When somebody like that says that. So it just makes me also feel a little bit sometimes like, why am I still in webinars? Piping up, because we're all like really invited to re-inhabit our bodies, our places, our communities, a relationship with the soil. Like there is all of us are highly overeducated, and there's, for me, increasingly some wisdom, and I'm not trying to be biblical here, in the biblical sentence, the meek shall inherit the earth, or if you wanted non-biblical, Gary Snyder in an address on re-inhabitation in 1977 ended with saying, in order to become truly re-inhabitory cultures, we have to make common cause with the remaining habitory cultures of this planet, the peasant and indigenous people of this world. They might have some knowledge of how to weather collapse because we have made their system collapse for them. They're already living in a post-collapse culture. Yeah, there's a lot of uncomfortable unlearning ahead, and we all sit in the mess of it, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be pretty traumatic. And I think that's why building community, building resilience, building relationships that are not digital but are analog, is the best advice I can give anybody.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Let me just jump here very, very briefly because I want to recognize the time that we're at. Donna, I see your hand is up, and I don't think we should stop you from sharing at all. I just think for the official part of the meeting, this takes us to the end. And I want to say thank you so much, not just to you, Daniel, but of course, mainly to you for being here, for sharing so much with us, for also being flexible to this new approach to the meeting. But I also want to say thank you to everyone else who's here, because we did have to reframe the meeting pretty on the spot, and I think it worked out perfectly. I don't think we lost any, or maybe 1 or 2 participants. So we're super happy that things worked out. Thanks to everyone for sharing, engaging in discussion. I think this was a great meeting where really everyone had the time and opportunity to chime in, and you did. So we love that, and we wish you a great rest of the day, a great month, and then we hope to see all of you back with us in October. So thanks again. Thanks, Peter, of course, also for moderating this discussion. Well done. And if anyone would like to stay on and ask some further questions, perhaps we can do that. But for the official part of the meeting, thanks to everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I've got another 10-15 minutes easily, so if anybody wants to.
Well, that's very generous. Thank you.
Greedy, but there's other people that haven't spoken, so go ahead.
Think I don't know how to pronounce your name, but you had your hand up briefly and then took it down again.
Yes, I did, because we're ending. I had a question around, thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing, first of all. I think it's very insightful, but it just kind of left this question lingering in my head around how do we start gaining momentum from businesses and players in the ecosystem regarding these kind of changes. So we're speaking a lot around re-indigenize, bringing in, these mindsets to be at the service of life, etc. But we have these kind of systemic norms in business and in the way we live, like you're saying, these cultural contexts. And that question of where do we start has been lingering, because it's almost like a problem.
Well, I mean, Peter called this the evolution of regenerative design, and I don't know what you talked about at the first hour, of course, but of course there are people like Bucky Fuller who used the word regenerative design a long time ago, and J.T. Lyle. And one of Bucky's favorite sayings is, don't fight the existing system, build a new system that makes the existing one obsolete. And for me, I try to, only partially for my sanity's sake, to, in the territory I'm in, find those businesses that are already living the new, that are forgoing a big global market and export opportunities and all of that and growth opportunities, and are saying, no, I actually want to produce in the region for the region. And sadly, on a tourist island, a lot of these are still financed by a privileged group of people that can afford to privilege that kind of production and consumption. But it creates the capacity to do so. It creates the pattern again. And then there are others who are spotting that social inequality bit and saying, no, I'm going to try to do this so it's actually accessible for everybody. And so you build local community co-ops with regard to locally grown food. And you forego the entire costly organic certification, this certification, that certification thing, and you make it community trust-based. You know the farmers, you know who's producing, you know the market garden, and people begin to, so for me, the large work that we have to do or can still do in terms of how do you, if you can't predict and control a system, and you ultimately can't manipulate it really, then you're limited with regard to a sort of linear design strategy that will create a predicted outcome. But you can dance with emergence. You can look at how do you create positive emergence rather than negative emergence in this complex system. And I would say that the judgment of whether it's positive or negative, I would say if it helps the health and wholeness of the whole system, so if it's salutogenic at multiple scales, individual, community, planet, then it's positive emergence. And if it's otherwise, it's negative emergence. And in order to create positive emergence, we need to pay attention to who's talking to who in the system, So the quality of the relationships, the quality of the information that flows between them, quality, not quantity in both cases, and the capacity of the system, all the actors within it, to actually see themselves as part of a larger system. And we get bombarded by the globalized culture and the advertising culture that we don't see that everywhere regenerative activity is happening right now in every community. It's not about creating a future utopia. It's about fanning the embers that are there in every place, making them visible to each other, and beginning to create a narrative where very diverse people begin to feel at home, where the lady who has for 20 years worked on helping single mums have a better life, and the guy who has protected the local badger, and the guy who's planting endangered species that used to grow in that area, are beginning to see everybody in their own way, but we're caring for the system. We're trying to make our activity, our enterprise, something that is salutogenic, that is healing the larger system, because we understood that the best way to care for oneself is to care for the context, for the community and the planet. And so, yeah, I don't know if that helps. Thanks for asking the question. And Alejandra. Tech problems.
Yes.
Yeah, there we are.
Thanks a lot for this space. I'm one of the new in this community. I live in Medellin, Colombia, and I wanted to tell you that your books have had a lot of influence here. Like, I know many corporations that are starting to have like a regenerative culture division, and they are trying to do things differently. One of them is Confama. I don't know.
Yeah, I've spoken at their summits a couple of times. I was thinking of them as you were speaking.
Yes, yeah. They are things in the bioregional scale. Mm-hmm. I come from a scientific background in applied physics and mechanical engineering, and as you say, I felt like it was kind of hopeless. Keep on studying just an instrument of renewable energies. So I moved into the social sciences. I'm starting my PhD now, and my subject is the emergence of flourishing entrepreneurs inspired by Anthony and Peter's model on a bioregional scale. Actually, in two hotspots of biodiversity in Antioquia, in my region, they are starting to crystallize like regenerative entrepreneurship networks, and it's amazing. Like, I don't know if they are a bunch of hippies like doing things in a different way, or there is a real systemic change happening, and that's what I want to study, like the influence of the biodiversity and the war, the different things like we have here in a bioregional scale, in a creek scale, and then the influence of the characteristic of the bioregion in the emergence of the regenerative entrepreneurship networks, and then the influence of them in the bioregional scale as well. So I wanted, I'm like connecting the work of many of you here in my PhD, and I wanted to know if you have maybe some kind of protocol of measuring or observing. I think I'm going to be like quali and quanti methodology, but maybe if you can advise me some things I can read, or where I can find measuring tools or assessment protocols for the bioregion, like how can I kind of see these variables?
Well, first, let me just say that it's wonderful to hear a voice from Colombia, and in general, I feel like Latin America is much more clicking into the meme regeneration, and in the right way, in the sense that it just resonates deeply as not something new, but something that in Latin American culture, because you actually still have, in some places, proximity to indigenous wisdom and nature that is teacher, it just resonates in the culture in a different way than it does in the West. Like the conversations I hear at RCA and RSA are still very in the head and not in the body. And I just see that in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in Chile, in Argentina, in Brazil. This movement has just ignited people in something that was already there, and which is so much more aligned with what this whole thing is about, that we're actually aligning with life's regenerative impulse that is flowing through us. And we are coming back home to our species' birthright and our species' inherent survival pattern, which is to inhabit landscapes as regenerative keystone species. And so, yeah, wonderful that you're doing this work. And the question, of course, is a very academic question, and it's part of the bioaccumulancy thing of maybe the way we approach the crisis is part of the crisis, because it's always what's the transferable process, what's the assessment tool, what's the impact measurement tool, and while people are breaking their wonderful heads and hearts over trying to make it better. So, for example, if you look at blue marble evaluation, people are really trying to evaluate impact in a very fundamentally different way in that network. But it still is that fundamental belief that we need to contrast and compare, and we need to prove that we're having impact. And for me, if I look into the eyes of one child that has been moved by somebody working regeneratively in place, or if I hear the story of one family that now is making a living meaningfully doing something they love while protecting their local environment, it's more impactful than to say, oh, we reached 352 learners for workshops that lasted a total collaborative time of 56 hours. It means nothing. And it takes so much time to do all this reporting and blah, blah, blah. So for me, I would really dance with narrative, with storytelling, with interviews, with qualitative data rather than quantitative data in that. But yeah, look at the work of Glenn Page, also a friend of Peter's, and many people here, Sustainer Matrix. They have tried to play around with that, but I'm personally not a certification and quantitative impact kind of guy. The other place that might be mentioned as a resource, because we do address some of these methods, is the massive open online courses that ETH is offering that I mentioned a couple of times in this conversation. They're free. You can do them as part of your PhD. If you want to get the certificates, you pay a little bit to ETH and you get the completion certificates. And they at that level, they introduce a lot of tools, and some of them might be useful for your research. Yeah, that's as much as I can say. Donna, you've been patient.
Oh, well, yeah.
Last question.
I'm greedy. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to have you know what, after several years, I would love to have an opportunity to have a chat with you around some things that we're observing whenever that works. But really appreciate what you've shared here. And I think there's a message that's coming through around reaching in deep into ourselves around the ways that we engage. And so we're still dealing with this world. We're trying to build new ways, getting on with the beingness. You referenced Nora's work, for example, a lot. So it's speaking to the need to find courage and encourage, and to speak from a voice that's deep. And there's more and more information out there that's telling people that collapse is here. it's happening. And so there is more readiness. And with that readiness, I think it does behoove us. We keep showing up in these places and having these conversations to have a bit more courage around the things that we are willing to broach with our organizations that we're engaged with our, those that are working as consultants, with clients. And Tim, if you're still here, we've had these conversations where this issue of meeting people where they're at, commonly used term, meeting people where they're at. And yes, we've all got to embark on the journey somewhere. And it's very easy for people to shut down, become very fearful. And fear is kind of the opposite of love. But this is coming from a deep place of love and finding that way of expressing that feels true to ourselves, not somebody else's voice, but inside ourselves. So thank you, Daniel. I just, I'm soaking it all up. Yeah.
No, Donna, the one thing that you made me think of is, for anybody who is in that field of offering consultancy to people, I less and less feel like I want to even be so presumptuous. The best litmus test for me was always, if I would ever hear myself, and I hear other consultants say that a lot, this is as far as I can take my client. If you hear yourself say that, then you have to go beyond. And I make it but of course, all of this is a practice of privilege, like of being in a situation where you can do it and where you're not trying to feed your family and therefore you have to keep the client. But I tend to just call a spade, not an agricultural implement anymore. And just as I have here, it's still a bit risque to say, I don't know. It's still a bit risque to say, by the way, stop kidding yourself. Let's ready for the changes we can no longer avoid, rather than pretend we can window dress capitalism 4.0 and continue business as usual. Yeah. And so, yeah, for me, it's just trying to keep real. And for me, it's more and more, yeah, coming into the daily practice of also, and this is important, I think, seeing what is still beautiful. I mean, for anybody who hasn't come across the wonderful series and conversations that I've had the privilege to curate with Philippa Duthie at the RSA, it's a podcast called Regeneration Rising. And just yesterday they put online the conversation with David Abram, and it's a wake-up call. It's pretty harsh. And at the same time, he really speaks to this, that there's the bit that they highlighted on LinkedIn was a bit where he says, we are the asteroid. We have hurtled towards space and killed thousands and thousands of species at a rate that is unprecedented in the last few million of years. We are the asteroid. And yet this world is still uncannily beautiful. And how do we dance with that?
Yeah, dance. And I love the fact that you keep speaking to it being a dance. And it's a conversation, actually, Darlene, who's here in this group as well, we've been having often. Maybe a starting place with many people is to say, how many people are really delighted with the way things are going? Come on. So maybe there's different ways we can kind of cut through and go into that space of unknowingness together. And then there's this amazing beauty and wisdom that's out there. Let's get over the imposter syndrome, because you know what? No one of us has to figure it all out and be so shit hot smart about it. We've got all this that we can draw from and figure it out, maybe. But there are no guarantees, and that's life. And all we have is now. That's it. Thank you. Much love. Much love. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for the stimulating 90 minutes. And thanks for those who made it 2.5 hours for you because you started an hour earlier. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Peter. It was lovely
to
meet you and have a chat with you, Peter. Hope we have more opportunities.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Certainly we have good communities in common, and I'm really glad that you could join us this September. I know this came right after your month away, and might fit in. I'm glad that this worked for us and for you. So glad you could make it for this. And we'll edit the recording a bit, but I think we have a very rich discussion. Also the chat. I mean, there's a lot here. There are a lot of links, some of the references that you made, Daniel. I took the liberty, and so did others, to follow up. There are links in there for people, so we'll follow. We'll hope there's plenty of good follow up. So take care again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have
a wonderful rest of the day, everybody, wherever you are.
Joining us.
Lovely for making the time. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.